Is now here, so now that we have a quorum, I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. Can someone start the recording, please?
Recording in progress.
Thank you. I'm calling the meeting at 5:46. Can I get someone to make a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Leo. All those in favor of the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
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 Perfect. Nays? Perfect. Communications with parents, citizens, and staff. Is there anyone who wants to address the board? Don't see anyone. So we will move on. Consent agenda. Can I get someone to make a motion for the consent agenda, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All of those that approve the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
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 Perfect. All right. Thank you for that. Nay? All right. We've passed the consent agenda. Next thing on our agenda is our monitoring report 2.9 on equity. Can I get someone to make a motion to accept that monitoring report, please?
So moved.
Thanks,
Second.
Barbara. And Leo? Discussion. We've all seen... I don't think anybody's seen this yet. I think we see it next week.
What's that?
The 2.9 equity monitoring report. So, hopefully everybody's...
It's in the packet.
Oh, I know that, but I meant
It's in the
on our
packet.
individual boards. I think our individual
yeah.
boards look at it next week, so it's not like we've already seen it once.
Correct.
So, if everybody's had a chance to look at it or have questions for Renee? No? Okay, then I would take a motion to, actually, never mind. I'm losing words now. Thanks. It must be spreading, Debbie. All those in favor of monitoring report 2.9 on equity, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Excellent. Monitoring report 2.9 on equity is passed. Moving on, governing style, we have our own board monitoring report 4.7 on governance investment. I don't have that in front of me.
Well, I mean, other than it needing dates
New
changed,
dates, yep.
So it's looks like it's been a while since. Do we not? We don't look at this.
We do it every year.
We do. Oh,
Yep, we do.
We haven't changed the dates in a while.
Oh,
it says
well,
August
maybe.
22 to June 23.
Yeah, no. Whoops. Probably forgot to change the dates last year.
I mean, other than I don't think we spent funds to do training this past year.
We did not. We did not
what
do
it
any of that.
says in the-
Okay, so we should change that. Although that is usually our practice is to do that.
I mean, we could shift it to the board. Something
Right. Okay.
can allocate. I don't know if we can
Yep.
or not actually allocate funds for trainings if necessary. We didn't have. I don't remember on our budget this year. Did we allocate money for training, or did we cut that?
No,
from this
we had
upcoming
cut that
budget?
from this budget that we just finished. So we have money, but we do have money going into next year.
Okay.
For plant, for PD.
So if it needed to say something like the board has funds to
Yeah.
to do trainings if necessary.
We can indicate that we had cut that funding for the 24-25 year and that we've reinstituted it for the 25-26 year.
Yeah,
Would that work for everybody?
I think that
Okay.
works. Sure.
All right. Okay. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, with those changes, everybody's good with this? Ethan, you too?
Yep. I'm fine with that.
All right, good. All right, we'll make those changes and send them off to Melinda. Okay, special education audit. So I'm going to turn this over to Brian or Renee, whichever one of you wants to introduce our guest tonight. No.
So I am really excited to just kind of kick this off.
this is something that I think, and I'll let Brian go first. This is something, we are really fortunate to have had such a strong, to have had a strong special ed department for a very long time, led by Marcia Bruce. And so it's important for us, as Brian's taking over and looking into the systems that we have in place, making sure that we are serving all of our students in a way that complies with federal law as well as state law expectations. And so, having looked at the data that we have for academic performance and graduation and lots of other aspects of how our students are doing, we have been able to observe that our special education students, there is a gap between their general education peers and our special education students. So this is the time right now, while the iron's hot, for us to really dive into how we are preparing our special education students through not just their everyday interaction with our special educators and our special education support professionals, but also looking at them in the continuum of our multi-tiered systems of support, and how students enter into the process, how successful they are during the process, and if students are ever exited from the process, how we're supporting them as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, for getting us started. And I'll just echo, and I'm just going to go a little bit through a couple of my slides, and then I'll introduce and turn it over to Lisa. So the audit why now? As Renee alluded to, taking over for Marcia has been a daunting task. There are big shoes to fill. She was in the role for over 20 years, and she took. When she retired, she took a great deal of her knowledge, her expertise, and that level of continuity with her. And I kind of had to rebuild some of that, and kind of make the special, learn and create all at the same time to kind of to fill those gaps. And Renee and I thought it was the right time. For me as a leader to understand where we're as I'm learning special education procedures and the law and best practice, and it was important for me to have an assessment for me to understand where we're at in order for us to plan where we're going. So that's where Renee and I came up with, with this idea to move forward, and we were lucky to have Lisa join the team in order to help us through that. I just want to speak a little bit about educational silos. I've been in this is my 5th year in the district, but I've been in education for over 20 years, and I've seen it as a principal, as a classroom teacher. We tend to in school districts to operate in silos, and what I mean by that is education, or special education sits over here, general education sits over here, and then sometimes we silo ourselves into specials and specialist teachers and classroom teachers, and it happens. I've worked in a K-8 most of my life, into middle school and into our different teams. But I would argue that a highly functioning educational system is a lot like an organic system, just like your own system, your heart, your lungs, your circulatory, your nervous. It all has to work together to make your body function at a high level. So in my view, in having Lisa come and do this, and part of what we asked her to do is to look at those systems and look at our tiered systems of support. Special education is often considered tier 3. There's a process, there's an eligibility process, based on disabilities, adverse effect, and the need for specialized instruction. There's a big process for that, but we need to, and that's our highest tier level of support. But there's quite quite a ways through in order to get there. And Lisa will spend a little bit of time talking about our Tier 1, our universal designs for learning, and our Tier 2, and how do we figure out what's the data, how do we get to the suspicion of a disability in as we move through our tiered systems of supports. So what ends up happening sometimes that I've found is when a student does become eligible for special education in that Tier 3, they do get a lot of services that they become entitled to. But in some ways, when we silo ourselves, kind of like, they're not our responsibility or students anymore. And, they're now special education students. But the truth of the matter is they're all of our students, whether or not a student has a disability or not. They're all our students, and a student in special education has the right to have access to universal designs for learning, and potentially for Tier 2 as well. Students still have access to all those tiers, and for example, that came up this year around counseling. Yeah, we don't have enough counselors, but just because a student is in special education doesn't mean they can't have access to the counselor, for example, right? So I think and also I kind of noted it creates inefficiencies and conflicts. And I feel like some of these conflicts drain us, and they're not necessarily, it's kind of self-inflicted. And what Lisa will talk to, and when Lisa did her staff interviews, the bringing down the silos part of it is clarity around role, around responsibilities, who does what, and how do we work together to support students with disabilities, and just so we have a vibrant learning environment. So when Lisa looked at all the different levels of tiered support, that's kind of what we're, not only do students with disabilities benefit, everybody benefits. So I will, I think now, Renee, what do you think is a good time? I have some notes about recommendations and stuff, but maybe I'll let Lisa present, and then I'll fill in any gaps. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. I will stop sharing, and Lisa can start.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Well, nice to meet everybody, although I'm here in New Jersey. I want to just start off by saying, when I got the phone call from Renee and Brian, first of all, I met Renee a few years back when I was working for a curriculum company. I was a vice president. I was at a conference, and we heard each other speak, and we just connected because Renee is all about MTSS, special education, equity, and so we just, developed a mutual colleague relationship. And then over the years, we've kept in touch, and I was so excited to get this phone call to come out and first of all, to spend so much time in Vermont, which is a beautiful state, as you all know, and just a great people. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting the entire team, Debbie, Brenda, Brian, Renee, all the principals. I spent a lot of time in your district, and it was awesome. I felt like home. The teachers were so excited. Principals were excited. And, Brian talked a lot about the silos, and the silos happen. It happens in organizations. It's things that every now and then when districts participate in audits such as this, it really brings you back to what your focus is and your goal. So I think that, coming here, and Brian in his new role, and Brian, you have great instincts. You have learned a ton over this last year. So, special ed can be challenging and tricky, but you definitely have risen to the occasion, and you are hitting the ground running. So I will start. Any questions before I begin?
Nope.
Nope. All right. Awesome. All right. Oh, hold on. Now, of course, I can't get this to full screen. All right, can everybody see this clearly?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So just a quick executive summary. The things that I'm going to go over today are the key strengths that were observed in your district, and then a lot of the challenges that Brian touched upon briefly are some things that I'll go over that I found in my findings, and then some of the recommendations. You'll see next to some of the recommendations and some other slides like a green check mark. Those are things that Brian had already started doing based on our conversation. So every time I came into district, Brian and I met, we kind of went over what was happening. Brian had so many ideas in the beginning. When you take on new roles, your mind starts spinning and you can't wait to dig in and just get moving. And he did a really nice job of just stopping and taking a deep breath and looking at what are the number one things that need to change within the structures in order to help move the needle. So it's been a great experience. So I will move on. So the methodology, Renee and Brian touched on it. So I went into 19 different classrooms across all of the schools. And I looked at 34 different indicators, looking at indicators, instructional practices, like did I see small group instruction happening? Were teachers allowing kids to have more student voice than teacher voice? I looked at differentiated practices. So that means if I'm in a special ed program or in a classroom with multiple students, are all kids working on the same thing, or is there differentiation? Are kids receiving different activities and lessons based on where they are? Brian talked a little bit about universal design for learning, and what that really means is all of us here who throw dinner parties, when we have dinner parties, we don't just make one thing, because we have people that are lactose intolerant, we have gluten allergies, we have vegans, and so it's kind of the same thing in the classroom. No longer do we present one way for kids, because our classrooms today are made up of so many different children. And so those are things that I looked at in the classroom observations. I then met with 66 staff members, teachers, special educators, interventionists, your EST teams, paraprofessionals, administrators, and I asked everybody the same questions. And then we sent out an anonymous survey, and you had 109 of your staff provide feedback on that survey. So it's a great number. So everything is valid that were my findings. And then I reviewed, obviously I looked at the Vermont Special Education Manual, the procedures, Vermont MTSS Manual. Debbie and I had great conversations about what's happening with MTSS and all of her ideas she has for the district. So I really had an abundance of materials to take a look at. And so here the first thing I'm going to go over is, Brian talked about the silo, so there's a little bit of a gap. And so when you do surveys, interviews, when you ask questions, according to sometimes what you see in a survey and interviews, is you see your teachers had a 99%, 99% of everybody I interviewed understood differentiation for different learners. But when you go into the classroom, you don't necessarily always see what people are reporting. And so it's just sometimes we need a little refresher on what that looks like. And when you go into 16 different classrooms, and I saw a lot of, and I'll talk about this later, a lot of whole group, and this is some of the recommendations we have for looking at, differentiated practices, universal design for learning. But this is what your teachers reported. They understood how to take a look at the assessment data. They understood their collaborative responsibilities, legal requirements, but the system itself, which is where MTSS, so MT is multi-tiered, and that's like tier 1, what happens in the core classroom. Tier 2 are the children that require additional support. And then there's tier 3, like Brian said, sometimes it's your special ed kids, sometimes it's kids that really need intensive support. So that's the MT, but the SS is a system. So we're going to take a deep look at the system. It's not that your staff isn't capable, it's that we need to tighten up some of the infrastructure to help close that gap for students and staff. So here are some key strengths that I found. First of all, your teachers were excellent. Every teacher opened their classroom. They were excited for me to come in. A couple teachers were nervous, but that's okay. I understand that because a stranger's coming in. But the kids were amazing. You have a life skills program at the high school, which was phenomenal. I think, Renee, you were with me at that time when we went in there. I mean, those kids, that teacher was differentiating for all the children. She was at the board, speaking. The kids were at their seats, actively engaged, laughing. I think they had a basketball game that night, but I had to drive back to New Jersey. So they were completely evident in all the indicators I looked at. It was awesome. You have a lot of great classrooms with flexible learning settings. There are different seats for kids to sit at. There's different arrangements. There's tables. The kids are working in pods. So you had all the structures and the learning environments that were great. Your para-educators were supporting students. You had some really cool, innovative instruction happening in some of the classrooms. This Math 7 class was doing this really cool scavenger hunt. They had stuff all over the school. The kids were excited about math. You had a grade 5 at one school where I met the mother and the daughter who teach together. The mother taught for 30 plus years. Her daughter's a 5th grade teacher.
Audrey.
Who was that?
The Allairs, Audrey and Lori. Yes.
Yes. So they had combined their classes and they were doing a unit on colonial unit, and they had all these arts and crafts, this integration there. The kids were making all these marble games. They had a great time. And, Renee, I said this to you, I think, Brian, I fell in love with that comm space. I think it was at Neshabe.
Yeah. Yes, it was Neshabe.
When I tell you the kids that would go into that program that were dysregulated, within minutes, they were calm. They had puzzles. They had, teachers that were there supporting them. It was such a great environment. That needs to be like in every school. Mm-hmm. But I know with that, Renee, comes funding, but it was awesome. I loved it. And then there were some things that I saw that need attention. I think, Brian, you and I talked about this, and Renee, is just the differentiation. Like in one of the learning labs, which is a special ed class, every kid was doing the same thing, although the kids were at different grade levels. So looking at making sure that when we're meeting our kids' needs, especially in our smaller group, that we're looking at how can we scaffold the instruction and design it for students. Again, when you do observations, it's a moment in time. It's what I saw at that point in time. There was a couple of classrooms in elementary specifically, it stood out just looking at tier 1 instructional practices, meaning are we providing the kids, graphic organizers to help them, word webs. A lot of the class was doing the same thing. There was a lot of whole group I saw. And there was one class in particular, and Brian, we talked about it, just the classroom management. I think it was a new teacher that needs some support. But overall, I saw some great strengths. And these are not uncommon. I do audits all the time, and these are things that when you talk about the silos that we need to make sure that we're planning for every kid in the class. So that's just one area that stood out. So Brian, and I think I had this at the end, so what we started talking about is the need for the collaborative planning time between special ed and gen ed. Not everybody across all schools has common planning time. And so that's something that's important that Brian is looking at right now with the schedules. In the staff voices, I captured some of their comments in here. Renee, and you'll have this if you were sharing it out, but I don't want to read the comments, but this is all in here. And I think it's important that your teachers know. I just presented in another district that, I said to the teachers, we heard your voice, and here's what we're doing. And I know, Brian, you talked about that, what you're going to roll out for the staff, so that's awesome. And here's all the things that Brian is doing. We recognize that there are system gaps. So from one school to the next, they're documenting things differently. Entrance and exit criteria that Brian talked about, the confusion of roles between the educators, and then just MTSS. So these are all things that we've kind of checked the box on. And I said earlier, Debbie, you and I had a great conversation about MTSS, the district manual, etc. So you guys are in a good spot and recognize that this is a need. Professional development. Again, and this came out in the interviews and when the survey is, they really want a stronger and deeper knowledge, understanding of MTSS. How do kids get in? How do kids float in between the tiers? When do we make a referral for special education? And when do we kind of change the intervention if it's not closing the gap on students? Co-teaching. Anytime we can give teachers that teach together co-teaching professional development is awesome. And then supporting the diverse learners. Across our country today, the kids that are in classrooms today are not like the children that were in classrooms 5 years ago. So as our kids change, our PD needs to change. And this is just that shows some of the outcomes of where they felt they needed the PD. I just wanted to show you how I captured it in my survey. So these are all areas that they said they needed support in, when you could see if it comes to the moderate or the strong or the very strong need. These are all great things to build out your system. And then I talked about this, the role clarity, just unclear responsibility between who does what in the system, and that's pretty that's easy. And I talked to Brian about, 504 oversight. Oftentimes, 504 is overseen by the Director of Student Services, Director of Special Education. It's just a cleaner system because then you understand what's happening from both ends, because sometimes you have kids with IEPs that have 504s for other things, vice versa. So it's good to be under the same house. And then I gave kind of like a foundation of a building blocks on kind of how to move forward, different phases that happen over the next year. And these are all things, and some of these things you've started already, so that's great. And then I want you to know that I looked at all the manuals you had for Vermont. I said this, there were some small gaps in the special ed procedures, but that just comes down to some of the findings of clarity of who the roles, what the paperwork is, and the same thing for the MTSS. But once everything is aligned, and there was only a few things that weren't aligned, I mean, the outcome, of course, is compliance and the students to move the needle. And then the next steps, part of our recommendation, would really to take a look at your IEPs and look at your accommodations that are happening across the board, because I think sometimes what happens, teachers feel pressure of all the accommodations that are in IEPs, but teachers are already providing those accommodations. So sometimes we for example, to have a graphic organizer in IEP, when we give kids graphic organizers consistently, trying to take a look at that, looking at how many accommodations we're providing, and if we're providing, for example, extended time on tests, do they really need it? Are we taking data on it? And then looking at your eligibility criteria and looking at the appropriateness of your goals and your IEPs. And then I believe very strongly in training all of your building principals. Obviously, Renee, aside from you and your board, who are very important people, and Brenda and Debbie and Brian, the most important person that moves the needle for kids in a school district is the principal. So, moving forward, the principal, they are the key with MTSS rolling out, because they, need to create a data culture in their schools where we're talking about kids, looking at how they're performing, and how do we shift our instruction based on what we're seeing. So the principal is key. They are the driving force behind the MTSS, framework, movement, etc. And I have that in there for you. And here are the outcomes to close a gap. Looking at everything, when there's all these things happen, we our systems are aligned, we close that gap. You're going to see a reduction in special ed referrals. You're going to see intervention effectiveness. You're going to see more inclusive learning environments. Your students are going to continue to grow, and your building principals will be really strong instructional leaders. And so, in a nutshell, that is it.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Stop sharing in case you have questions.
So
I can't thank you enough. I love your district. And I love the Morningside Cafe, that's what it's called.
we're fans of both. Thank you so much.
She's a Jersey girl too, so that's why I love her too.
That was really funny. That was funny. So I just have a couple things as Lisa was talking. A couple of things that came up for me, and then we can put it out the questions out there for us. Part of the work about the collaborative time, Debbie and I are working on how to include special education into our data days. Generally, it's been done for ESTs, but the inquiry question is how do we use data to keep us all on the same page? Because general educators should be included in that data, so they know the progress that's occurring in those services and whatnot. We just need to all be on the same page for our students in special education. The one thing I wanted to mention about 504 is we've already been talking about how to migrate 504 to special services. That's going to take a little bit of time, but those conversations are already occurring, specifically have been occurring between me and the central office team and me and principals as well. Another piece was about consistency in kind of forms and consistency amongst our schools, and a component of that is I'm building in conjunction with the special educators, a shared drive, so to help with that, but also improving our use of EduClimber. And we have some really good ideas about how we can use EduClimber, which is kind of a little bit of a data warehouse. So general educators should have consistent access to updated IEP accommodations, modifications, services, and so on and so forth. And we use EdDoc in order to track that with the state, but general educators don't always have access to that. And we also need to kind of track who has access appropriately to that information. EduClimber is a great opportunity for us to have ways that general educators can have access to that information that students on IEPs are entitled to. And the last piece about future work and about our work with the specific individualized educational plans, the IEPs, which are the kind of bread and butter, is specialized instruction. As we talk about what really is the bread and butter of special education, and it's about specialized instruction to get those skills so students with disabilities can reach those grade level standards. And the IEP is the map to that. And IEPs in our district we have 222 of them, and they're great. They're just inconsistent, and I'd like to see more consistency about how we're using data, how we're developing and determining services and the exit of services, and accommodations and modifications that students need, and all based on the disability and what's called threading the needle, to making sure that all IEP services, accommodations, modifications, and goals are threaded within their disability area to provide them that support. It's very, very important. So Lisa's potential work with Lisa in the future is looking at those IEPs so we can move the needle forward in terms of how we're mapping out that progress through the IEP. So those are kind of, and Lisa, thank you so much. And those are kind of my final thoughts. We'll have our presentations, but we'd like to know what questions you have for Lisa, Renee, or I, or Debbie, regarding this work. And like I was talking about earlier, is really mapping that work forward. How do we goal set? How do we set benchmarks for ourselves and me as a leader? And how do we assess that over time to see if we are reaching those goals? So this was very important.
Does anybody have any question? I have a question, but I'll wait. Brenda or Barbara, questions?
There are 222 IEPs. I can't remember.
As of, I should say, that was our child count as of October. Okay. Child counts counted every. So we've had some students become eligible and some students exit. Okay. So at this moment in time, it's just counted in October.
And what's our enrollment in this district roughly?
Short of 1,500.
1,500. Okay.
Yeah. So we have to, in order to be really accurate with that, we have to go in and you can't just pull we're realizing we can't just go in and pull the overview number, because that includes home study students if they come in for just a portion of the day. So next, we could get that for you, but it's we're still working on making that more accurate.
Yeah, that's part of our data work this summer, to make sure that we have that number accurately reflected in our Power School, so that way when we have information asked of us, and we are also including it on a dashboard that will be available on the website, so people can keep score at home, which is great.
We used to be able to go in and just pull the overview, and we're realizing now that in some ways we're sort of doing what the state is asking us and thinking about flexible pathways. So in some ways that's good. In other ways we don't necessarily have them in our system the way that they should be in our system. So we should be able to pull that more accurately, like Renee said, once we clean all that up.
Yeah, did you have a question? Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
All right, so Lisa said that the person who moves the needle is the principal. And so knowing that our four principals really are relatively new at being principals, in the long short of things, do we feel confident that, like what kind of training do they need? Is there specific special PD that our principals need in order to kind of be the person who does make sure that things move? I mean, in order to make sure that, you know, kids aren't being siloed and that they are being able to move back and forth and that they're getting what they need. So I'm just curious. I mean, is
So-
that, you know, do they need more PD in that regard?
Yes. The answer to that is yes. So we had a great retreat today. Thank you, Debbie, for organizing that. But I would imagine, so the level of conversation that we are starting to have, not just about how we're serving our students, but actually getting into the position where the principals are looking at how the students are actually engaging with the grade level standards. That is something that I think that's kind of the first step. The next step is we have a dedicated date where we are providing them with access to Lisa and to Brian for 3 hours to really unpack this audit, so that way they have the ability to know where our goals are as a result of this audit. On top of that, aligning our work to the continuous improvement plan and the data that we've discovered and have written into the plans. The goal is for students to be able to be with their general education peers and be able to have access to Tier 1 instruction as often as possible. And so that has already been laid out to our principals. So yes, they understand where our goals are, and it is our responsibility to provide them that professional learning so that they know that it is when they are running their campuses and they are the instructional leaders, and they are also serving as social emotional leaders as well on the campus, that they know that every opportunity to be able to interact with a student, whether it's them or it's their member of their staff, we have a responsibility in order to ensure that that interaction leads to a better outcome for every student. So that is why we already have most of our professional development designed for this coming year, and the expectations are really high that they are diving into the curriculum as well as the intervention from our scope and sequence that we have that we're implementing going into next year. Debbie, please feel free to add on to that.
Yeah, all of that. And something sort of specific that might be helpful is that, so for example, our principals will be on August 4th, they'll be attending the leadership thread of the Amplify training. And that is specifically all about when they walk into a classroom, this is what they should see. So it sort of like lays it all out there. And Amplify, Lisa will love this. Amplify provides not so much Tier 3 intervention. What it provides is Tier 3 supports for that universal up to Tier 3. So Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports, so that as Renee and Lisa mentioned, you know, and it was Brian actually first, that, you know, all of our students, to include our students receiving specialized instruction, have a right and should, because it's best practice, receive that universal instruction. And if it's out of reach and teachers do not have the materials and the resources, it's a big lift every single day to sort of make all of that up. But Amplify does provide those Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports for universal instruction. So I'm very excited about that. And that is actually K through 8. So we discovered that today when I spoke with some of we all sort of went in different directions on Friday to get the different PDs from Amplify. But we'll come back together as administrators and get that on August 4th.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be helpful.
And I think that's great work. Just from my own personal story, coming from the principalship to the special education director, I did. They do not prepare you, in my view, adequately enough in leadership in the 2-year program that I was in for the principalship in handling special education, because I was expected to be LEA, and I was, and I did the best I knew how. But what I know now, a lot of that I should have known as a principal. So it's kind of, the ownership is on me to bring that story to principals, and we did that this year, and we need to continue. I would present our data, I would present our child find, I would present our indicators, and to try to bring that learning to principals. Also, keeping notice to what's going on. For example, the VCSEA, which is the Vermont Special Educator Administrators Association, is about to do an LEA training. So any principal who goes to an IEP meeting, and I can't possibly, I get invited to them all, but I can't possibly be at every IEP meeting. So that administrator is representing me, and I need to make sure that when they're acting as LEA in my stead, that they understand the law, the rules, and everything, so they make the best. They can guide the conversation to make the best decision possible for the student, right? So I think a little bit of that ownership is on me to make sure I bring that to principals, so they understand their important role. They're not excused from special education. They have an important role in special education, and I think I just need to be making that very clear with them.
And what does LEA stand for?
Local educational agency. It's just the fancy name for the person who is at the end of the day making the decision, especially if there's a disagreement at an IEP meeting.
Okay. And then you also indicated that from your findings, that we have some work to do in the individual classrooms as far as differentiating instruction. And so from that work, I'm assuming you are providing the teachers with additional supports on how to do that, or professional development on how to do that in classes?
Yeah, so we did some of that with the science of reading training that happened all this year. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. The second piece is that they'll be able to take what they learned, and now they have the materials. And Amplify is very heavy on they sort of connect the dots for teachers as you go along and use the program. Also, Otter Valley, we just spoke with Rachel Gabriel. I think that's her name. She is going to be providing us with some work this year on disciplinary literacy. And so that is thinking about literacy across all content area at the high school. So we should really have a K-12 focus on ELA this year. And that's really across, certainly at Otter Valley, across all content areas. The elementary school, almost everything that you do is ELA and math, and ELA is tied into math pretty deeply as well. So I think this is going to be really good work for all of our teachers this year.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, thank you very much for being here tonight, even if you are in New Jersey.
We forgive you.
We just had all your rain. It has rained for the last month. I feel like I live in Seattle. It's terrible. But thank you for sharing your district with me. It's really been amazing to come and learn about Vermont and just to meet the people. I mean, I drove to every school when I had some time in between. I drove the back roads. I went to the general stores. I went to the one-man post office. I mean, I had the best time. It was awesome. So looking forward to returning. So thank you again, and thank you for trusting me and for everything. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you, Lisa. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Let's see. So, RNESU board retreat, finalized date and PD planning. So, my assumption is, and you can all tell me if my assumption is wrong, but I think our retreat should be the third week in August, a third Wednesday in August. That would be our normal meeting time anyway. So it might be easiest for planning.
So that is August 20th.
Okay. And so normally we do like a 5 to 8 here. But the question is Renee, did you have any particular PD planning that you wanted to do that night? Or does anybody here on the board have specific things they would like us to be doing that evening.
I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I think it would be good for us to likely go back through the ends just to make sure that we're that they're still applicable to what we're hoping to accomplish.
Sure. The RNESU board retreat is a little bit different than our 2 district retreats because we really only oversee the big things, special ed, curriculum, things like that. So I'm not sure what, I don't know what we've done in the past, but well, if you think of something over the summer, because I know you're going to all be thinking about this, please send me an email, or and I'll be talking to Renee about what kind of PD. But to entice you to be here, we'll make sure there's food. So yeah, that should get everybody here. And but anyway, so we'll plan on that. If people realize that's going to mess up dates or something, also email me, let me know, so that if we need to change the date, we can. And so that's really, we'll be looking at our annual work plan at the same time. So our ESU retreat details essentially is be here at 5 on the 20th. We'll have food. We'll have a great time talking about something. And we'll leave around 8 o'clock. Superintendent informational report should have been in your packet. Is there anything you wanted to highlight, Renee?
Yeah, there's a few more things that I added to it after it was submitted. Just wanted to let people know that the House Bill 454 did pass, and it passed despite the recommendations against it by the superintendents, the Principals Association, School Boards Association, NEA. Were all against it. But it's been now forwarded to Governor Scott for his signature. And so the bill is very much about governance and funding. There is very little about actually achieving student outcomes. So that's going to largely be left to the Vermont Future, the Commission of Future Public Education and the State Board of Education, and of course the AOE Secretary. So I look forward to seeing what those things look like.
How do we get on those boards? How do we get on those committees?
State Board of Education, I think you're appointed, and then the Commission of Future Publication, that's one that's already has members, and it was already in existence, and it was supposed to provide us a report in December 25. But the governor got ahead of himself and created the the plan. So we'll see where that ends up going.
Okay.
There's a couple of other cool things. So we several members of the Educational Support Professional Union and I submitted an application so that we could get some support for creating a mentoring program for our incoming paraprofessionals, and hopefully we'll expand it beyond paraprofessionals. And so we were selected. So we are one of 10 districts from across the country who have been selected to be part of this. And so we have some training to do, of which we are going to receive some assistance from Vermont NEA as well as the National NEA. So I'm very proud of their work, and I look forward to making sure that this is successful for the district. And then lastly, our Otter Valley teacher, Brooke Kimball, was named the Vermont State Unified Sports Coach of the Year. So that is really exciting for us.
Super exciting. She deserves that. She does great work.
And that's it. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So we've already set our date for our next meeting, which is going to be August 20th at 5 o'clock with food. That's just to get you here on time. And then, but we do need to go into executive session for tonight regarding labor relation agreements with employees. So if I could get someone to make a motion to go into executive session at 6:35.
So moved.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there a second? Kevin is seconding. Okay.